Welcome to Walmart Mario Maker, our take on creating a 2D platformer using a user-friendly DSL. Before we sit down and play video games, let's go into some history. During our first brainstorming session, after we had decided that we wanted to do a platformer, we had to decide on how we wanted our user to write the program. We ended up on two possible approaches. Our first approach was to have the user place objects in a level by drawing it out, kind of like Markdown. After some helpful advice from our TA,
what is this? This looks awful.
We ultimately decided that this approach would be too limiting. Namely, this wouldn't really allow us to implement control flow. The second approach, the one we decided to stick with, is more similar to how JSON formatting works. First, the user defines objects like terrain or platforms. When declared, each of these objects must have their respective properties defined. Our player needs speed and health, for example. Our levels essentially serve as the program. Inside them, other objects may be spawned by placing them into pseudo-properties that work as categorizers. We take the name of an object we defined earlier and give it an array containing all the individual instances of it that we want. If the program was written correctly, we should have something that looks like this. As funny as it would have been, the front end is implemented in JavaScript, not Racket. As you can see, we've got our own little platformer. You can run, jump, hit buttons, go through doors, and die horribly. Not too dissimilar from Computer Science 110. In addition to being able to place these objects statically, we've allowed the user to utilize dynamic control flow in the form of conditionals. We can place checks inside our level, which are essentially user-defined functions and conditionals at the same time. Our language allows the user to use standard logical imperators with quantifiable properties and button press checks to trigger actions like spawning enemies in. The platformer portion is built with React and HTML5 based on an article by Will Mager on Atomize Objects. Following the article gives you a nice little auto-scroller. It's relatively functional, but we ended up rewriting most of the engine. We first started by letting our character move around. Then we implemented gravity rather than drawing out the jump arc manually. After that, we incrementally added various features, some placeholder assets, and eventually had a working mockup that we used for our first user study. In the study, we asked participants representing our targeted audience to write a .gregor file.
Alright, any questions before we start?
What's a variable?
There are a few quality of life changes we decided on after this to make our language more friendly for non-programmers. This included having a consistent order of declarations, using the OR keyword instead of the logical OR symbol, and making our coordinate system be 1-based rather than 0-based. After finalizing some more grammar decisions, we began working on the back end. A few crunch nights later, and we had successfully made a reasonably functional product. We then used this to conduct our second user study. This time, we gave our user a specific to-do list. We found that there were still some things we could do to make it more user-friendly. And that's where we are today. If you're not willing to give Nintendo $80 to play Mario, you've come to the right place. Thanks for watching, and remember,